Hello, everyone. This is the first episode of Behind the Faces with Dr. Mary Edgerton, who's a close friend and a mentor to me. So I'll hand it over to Mary for a brief introduction of herself before we start.
Well, where do I begin? I think I'm a bit of a will-o'-the-wisp. I, I've lived in different countries. I've visited every continent. I've visited, I think now I'm up to 43 out of the 50 states. I have goals, and I don't know. I maybe a short attention span or a broad range of interests. Depends on how you want to look at it.
I
But I
think
go ahead.
I was going to say broad range of interests is a good way of putting it.
And I started out in physics and then obtained a PhD in biophysics, and then I worked in academia and then worked in industry. I worked for Exxon and then for Mobil before they were one. And then I worked in, oh no, I didn't work then for a while. I actually went to medical school. So my cousins asked me, why aren't you ready to retire? I said, I have to make up for all those years I lost retirement income while I was in medical school. And then I started out in internal medicine, but I switched to pathology, and there's a story behind that. And I love it. And so I'm a breast pathologist and pathology informatician. So it brings together, I think, all the parts of me, the quantitative and the pattern recognition. And I spend half my time in Houston, Texas, and half my time in Omaha. And I go between an empty apartment where I can enjoy the nothingness back to a cluttered house that I'm working on, uncluttering. And let me tell you, you can throw out 5 bags and and it doesn't show. I, anyway,
You can't
uh,
forget the cats.
oh, and I love cats, but we have a strange relationship. I have an upstairs cat and a downstairs cat because they don't get along. And ever so often, my upstairs cat escapes to the downstairs, sees the downstairs cat, and comes over and swipes at me and growls as though she's saying, I knew you were hiding someone else here.
That is a very interesting dynamic of the cats. I don't think I've heard of someone being able to manage two cats like that. What do you do? What do you do when you're gone?
Well, I have somebody living in my house who takes care of them. And my upstairs cat is difficult to get to know. She was abandoned when she was 5.5 weeks old.
Oh,
And I think that probably her mother didn't get very much food to eat. And so she's just a little fighter. She doesn't want anybody nearby when she's eating, and she gets upset and swipes at people. So, so my lodger, as I call her, is I, I would say it's not that she's not fond of her, but I think well, as she puts it, I feel as though I terrify her, and that makes me feel bad. So I don't spend a lot of time with her. But when I get home, oh my gosh, love pours out of her eyes, and she sleeps with me, and she nuzzles against me, and she doesn't leave me. And when I get up in the morning, she follows me all around the room, and she tries to follow me to the downstairs. We have to put a quash on that. And then my other kitty cat was a feral cat from college. So she's so I have a semi-feral cat living in my house.
oh
She
wow.
will let me rub her belly, but she will not let me hold her. If I make any move, oh, with my hand starting to go over her head, she's gone like lightning. She has very strong survival skills, but she will come up every so often. I sleep down on the sofa, sleep downstairs on the sofa so that we can have some time together. And she will come and she'll actually grab my hand to rub her face against it. So I love
Oh,
my cats. I want them to love each other, but we're working on that. I've
do you
even seen
let
a
them
cat.
go out?
No, no, I've even seen a cat therapist. I actually did, though, just recently screen in my back mini porch. It's not much of a porch, it's just a little postage stamp back deck, but I screened it in and put a cat tree in it. So it's a little catio. So my downstairs cat likes to go outside and oh, it's really cute to watch them. They sniff the air and they taste it. They open up their their mouths with their tongue and they taste the air, and you can just see that little wild cat who was surviving on her own, tasting the
Wow.
air. Yeah.
Is that like do they perceive smell and taste differently than we do? Is that why they're opening their mouth?
They, well, much like we do, they, there, there's a part of our taste buds that senses aromas.
Mm.
I know that sounds a little unusual, but the molecules that give you a sense of smell will also come into your mouth and interact with your taste buds.
I guess in that from that perspective, it makes sense that they do that.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow,
And
that's
yeah, it's fascinating. They're fascinating little creatures. And if you want to see something really interesting, there was a New York Times article several years ago, oh, maybe 10 years ago, about how cats drink and how they've videotaped them and how they swirl their tongue around and swirl up the liquid. It's not a single lap of, filling a little lap like a little spoon. It's actually a swirl that swirls it up. And it's wonderful. I love cats.
I think I've
They're stuffed animals come to life.
I
You
think
know?
I've seen the video you're talking about. I've seen it. They've done other animals too. I think they've done dogs too. It's they drink differently than we do because, like you said, because their head is down, so they're fighting gravity. The water
Yes.
is like inherently trying to fall out of their mouth rather than in their mouth. So
I'm,
it's interesting adaptation mechanism that they've developed to gain the water to get into their mouth. Yeah. But
yeah, I
I would
love
say I'm more of a dog person than a cat person. And that's mainly because I think I don't, growing up, in my personal life, growing up, cats have always been like, feral. So I think they're very defensive. And so because of that, like there's always been a distance between us.
they are very defensive. But I'll tell you, I was brought up with cats, not dogs. I I was born in Austin, Texas, at which moment I like to tell everybody take a moment of silence. Austin is the center of the universe. I mean, how can you be in Paris, falling in love with somebody, and then sit around and talk about what a great place Austin is to live? Okay. It has appeal. And but when I was 5, we moved to Rio Grande City, Texas, which was then in the third poorest county in the USA, and a very very different environment. Although I appreciate it now. We lived on the highway, and so every time where the highway came into town, every time we kids told my parents we wanted a dog, they said no because they said we can't go through the trauma of a dog being hit by a car.
Oh
But
yeah.
there were cats living around the house when we
Okay.
arrived. It's a family house, and next door was a restaurant. And so Mother Kitty just adopted us. And she had a lot of litters. She had a gentleman caller whom we named Panther, who was black. And ever so often, he would actually come by and see his children ever so often. And so we kept several of her offspring. So I know cats.
Like in the house you kept them?
They were indoor outdoor cats.
Oh, I see, I see. So you would feed
And
them and interact with them.
And then if they wanted to go outside, you'd let them out. And they'd they'd come and meow and walk over to the door. And you could tell that our female cat was much smarter than her younger brother because she would come in upstairs. There's a roof that's almost like a roof terrace with a door out to it from my parents' bedroom. So you would hear her meowing at the door, let her in. And then, as cats do sometimes, they want you to follow them. So they look at you and they take a few steps and they look at you, and that's the signal, follow me. And she would go down the stairs and then want to be let out the front door down on the ground floor. So she didn't want to have to climb down from the roof and then jump over the fence to get into the front yard. She wanted to come in and go down the stairs and then go out the front door.
Oh wow.
And so she knew where all the doors went to and how the outside was connected. And her younger brother, always, if you went to let him out a different door, he had no idea where he was. So we knew who the smart one was. Yes.
Did the younger one ever did the brother ever follow his sister?
No, he was bigger than her. And I do remember one time it, they were friendly with each other. But one time he was chasing her, and there was a little raised garden bed that was raised and a little narrow, and so she had jumped up in the garden bed and was running along it, and he was chasing her, and she was getting to the end of it, and she actually flipped over on her back, and as he came forward, she kicked him off of it.
Oh, wow.
She was very much brain over brawn.
I like it. The agility too, to like go on your
Oh,
back on the
yes,
fence.
and to think about it right there, it's like, okay, what am I going to do? I'm getting to the end of this. I'm going to think about this. Oh, this is what I'm going to do. Got him all.
It's like a mini karate movie going on.
Yes, yes, exactly, exactly. She was brilliant. Her name was Queen of Sheba.
Why Queen of Sheba?
Well, when we would find names, make names up for the cats after Mother Kitty, and then there was Topsy, who liked to play with spinning tops.
Okay.
Uh, then my mother said, "Oh, we need some romantic names. How about Attila the Hun and Queen of Sheba?" So Attila the Hun was Queen of Sheba's brother, and
Yeah.
uh, uh, and so Sheba, we call Sheba and Queenie, and then later when her younger brother came along, he was Panther Junior because he looked so much like his father.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Was
yeah.
there an Attila in there or no?
No, we didn't have Attila the Hun. We did have St. Thomas Aquinas. He was a
Oh,
very
okay.
smart kitten, and my mother said, "Well, we should call him Thomas Aquinas because Thomas Aquinas was supposed to be very smart."
Oh, was he smart?
He was. When he played, the cats would play King in the Mountain on the back of a chair
Mm.
outside on the patio when they were kittens. And he would always end up knocking everybody off and being King in the Mountain. And then my mother would work on us giving away the cats. So we
Oh,
would we would give them away, but no one took Sheba, so we kept her. And Panther, my Panther was a little different. We went away for the summer, and he was a single kitten. We had given Mother Kitty a shot to prevent her from having kittens. And at the end of 6 months, she had a single kitten, and she usually had five. And when that kitten was probably 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, we went away for several months. And we think she abandoned him, but he survived.
oh wow.
And he was feral. And so we came back at the end of the summer and we started realizing there was a little black shadow in the backyard that would run away and hide. And so slowly we started putting food out and then bringing it closer and closer to the house. And he finally became an indoor outdoor cat, very tame, unlike my college cat. And and when Mother Kitty had her next litter of kittens at 6 months of age, he went and nursed right next to them. They looked so cute, a little row of tiny babies, and then this big 6 month old cat.
Transitioning from cats, more about your upbringing. Where would you go for the summer? For vacation, I assume?
We didn't take vacations. We were not a typical American family. I
Okay.
think I mentioned we lived in the third poorest county in the USA, and people didn't take vacations. About
Mm.
60% of the population there were migrant farm workers. And they actually would leave school in March. The kids would leave school, and they would go and they would work in the fields and picking cantaloupe, watermelon, and then they would follow the harvest. So the harvest
Mm.
would start down in South Texas, and they would follow it through Colorado and all the way up to Washington State, and they would come back around October. And it's quite a life. They lived in work camps along the way and came back. They worked in the hot sun.
Yeah,
Um, and
hard work.
yes, and people who meet people from Rio Grande City and say, "Well, what did your parents do? You're a principal. What did your parents do?" This is a colleague of mine from MD Anderson Cancer Center. And he said, "Oh, my parents were migrant farm workers." And she came over to me and she was shocked. She said, "Did you know his parents were migrant farm workers?" I said, "60% of the people here were migrant farm workers.
Mm.
My best friends were migrant farm workers. I would miss them when they would go away and come back." But we didn't take vacations. We went down there. Uh, my father had been raised there and he had inherited some property.
Mm.
And none of the siblings of his family were taking care of the property. So he decided he would go back and start ranching. He had worked as a petroleum engineer, and the oil industry has its ups and downs, and it was having one of its downs. And so he said, well, I'm going to take my family back to Rio Grande City, and we're going to start ranching. And when you have cattle, if you don't have somebody to take care of them, it's hard to leave them.
Mm.
And not to mention the fact that for the first several years, we hardly paid any income tax because we were living off savings and building up the ranch. So this meant putting up fences. And then to get cattle, we made a deal with a rancher who had cattle but no land. And he said, I'll rent your property by giving you half of my calf crop every the calves are born every 6 months in the spring and fall. I'll give you half my calf crop throughout the year. And so we'd go out for the roundup. I remember that. I must have been 9, 10, and watch these cowboys round up these cows, and uh, and then we'd get half of the calves. And we had another little patch of land about a mile away from where this main ranch was. And so we'd move our calves over there, and and they lived off the land. We had a windmill for their water, and then we planted something called buffalo grass, which is it's an import. It's from Africa that was modified by Texas A&M University to be a drought resistant um, pasture grass. And so we had buffalo grass that they would eat. Or if we had a dry season, a drought, and we did have some, we would burn the thorns off the cactus so they could eat the cactus. So you'd go around with
Oh,
this,
interesting.
yeah, you'd have this butane tank hanging on your shoulder, and then this long wand, maybe about 3 feet long, and a piece on the end of it, and you'd start flowing the gas through there and light the end of it, and it's big flame. And then you'd make a really loud noise and burn the thorns, walk through and burn the thorns off the cactus. It
It's like
was
a
a,
flamethrower.
it's like a flamethrower, and it's a very different lifestyle. And years later, my brother was laughing. He said, I saw something on the news, the national news, talking about a drought in Georgia and how the ranchers were using extreme methods such as flame torching the cactus to provide food for the cattle. And we're like, oh, we did that every year.
So was this in your childhood or adolescence is when you started
Well,
helping out in the ranch?
in my childhood, my brother, being the only boy, 2 girls and a boy, and I'm the youngest, he's in the middle. That's why I think he's very nice, because he had an older sister and a younger sister to make him nice. And when he was in the 6th grade, which I guess is about age 11 or 12, my father started taking him out to the ranch to work during the
Oh, wow.
roundup. He would actually take him out of school. And my mother said, that's fine, George. George was my father's name. But if anything happens to him, you drop him off here at the house, and then you just drive on to Mexico. Never come back. And so John never got hurt. And we, the girls, did a little less until we got a little bit older. And when I was in my teens, I actually worked in the corral helping round up the cattle. And that was exciting. Um,
How
here's
do
how
you how
you
do you get into that? How do you even learn the manual dexterity of it all?
So rounding up cattle is quite an operation. You
I
have
can
all these
imagine.
cattle roaming over, gosh, I think we had 450 acres. They're roaming over 450 acres. And that's not a lot in South Texas, because whereas in Nebraska, you have 50 cows to the acre, in Texas, you have 1 cow to 20 acres. So 450 acres is really this huge ranch, uh, as people might imagine it would be in Nebraska. So it gets hot. So you go down at midnight, and you close, and the water trough is in the middle of the corral, and you close the gates, and you wait a couple of days and the cows get thirsty. And then you go back to the ranch and you drive and you park a little ways away. And actually, for us, it was on a hill. And you kind of walk around so the cattle don't see you. They were used to us because we'd put out food for them, but
Mm.
they exactly what I'd call a tame animal. And you sneak around and you open up the gate and they all rush in, and then you close the gate behind them. And now you've got all the cows in the corral, and then your corral is divided into pens. So you have the pen they first go into, then you let about 15 of them into another pen. So you just go over and open up another gate, and cows aren't real smart. In fact, I think that if we hadn't domesticated cows,
Yeah.
they would not have survived. Uh, so so a few of them will drift in and you close that gate. So now you have about 15 cows and you have two people in this cutting pen. So one person starts chasing them around in a circle. That's the scary position. And the other person is holding what we call a cutting gate. And you open it and let one in. As
Okay.
they're running around, then one will be running at the edge, the preferred place on the, or actually, I guess it's the least preferred place, isn't it? On the raceway is the outermost one because you have to cover more area. But you'll
Mhm.
have a cow out there, and you let that one cow into this funnel, and it funnels into a narrow chute. And at the end of that chute, you have a contraption called a squeeze chute, which is a little open so the cow thinks it's a funnel again. And as the cow
Mm.
gets into it, you pull a rope and it pulls up the sides and squeezes it. And the cow has thrust its head through the front, and you pull down a bar that holds its head in place. And now you can brand it, give it shots, um, tip its horns,
What about
and
the hoof trimming process? I watch random YouTube videos of cow hoof trimming.
so we didn't trim their hooves. We trimmed
Okay.
their horns, but horses get a lot of trimming.
Okay.
A lot of trimming. Our cattle were out on the,
Oh.
in the field, on the rocks and so on, so they rather naturally wore down their hooves. Um, we did castrate the males, the young
Mm.
males, and they when they were quite young, about 3 months old, and so you separate these little calves from their mothers, and in a similar process to what I've just described. And then you pull the calf down and wrap a rope around its 4 feet, and then the operation takes place. So my job was holding the calf down.
Mm.
And then my job in the corral, originally I was going to hold the cutting gate, and my mother was actually running the cows around, but I could see that she was uh, uh, a little scared, maybe even terrified. I mean, they're big animals.
Yeah.
And so I said, you want to trade places with me? Because what happens when one of them becomes angry, which one will do, and starts to charge at you, you run for the nearest fence. And so if you're on the cutting gate, you can just climb up on the gate. So I
Yeah.
said, you can cutting gate, you can climb up on the gate. I think they'd given it to me because I was the youngest. I said, you can take the gate and I'll run them around the pen. And the other thing you do is you carry a big stick with you so that if you get caught, you whack the cow between the eyes and it'll kind of be stunned for a moment. And you keep running. So it's run and carry a big stick. It's a little like being Teddy Roosevelt in the corral.
It seems like a tough upbringing to go to go through all this
you know,
while in school.
yes, but everybody in Rio Grande City had a tough upbringing. They were ranchers and farmers. Um, there were a few big farms, largely wealthy Anglos. There were a lot of smaller ranches like
Mm.
we had there, and then there were migrant farm workers, and then there were a few service uh, institutions like stores, a little grocery store, a little grocery store. I'd never been in a big grocery store. In fact, when I grew up, you went to the little grocery store, and you also went to a meat market separately. And one of my favorite times would be when the cantaloupe were ripened, and they pick them to ship them out of town on the railroad. And what happens is they're trying to pick them before they're completely ripe so that they won't spoil on their way to the other parts of the country, up to the Northeast and so on. And then you put them in these train cars, and as you get closer to your destination, you gas them with it. I forget what the gas is, but it causes them to ripen. But there's nothing like a vine ripened cantaloupe that is ripened on its own in the sun. I mean, it's a taste that is heavenly. And so we knew a lot of small farmers. And when they would go out and be picking their cantaloupe, they would have some that were too ripe to ship.
Mm.
So you'd open up your door, and for a couple of months, on any one Sunday, you might have a whole case full of cantaloupe there that was all vine ripened. Or if you hadn't received a gift, you could drive down the road, and there would be these little stands that they had selling their vine ripened cantaloupe, and it was delicious. Just there's nothing like it. The way you tell if a cantaloupe is ripe is you pick it up and you smell it where the stem has come off. And if you smell the sweet cantaloupe, you know this one is ripe. And I
That's a
go in and I see them. And during the pandemic, I wanted to smell them. And I was about to pull down my mask and take a sniff. And then I thought, that's probably the worst thing I can do. You know, I'm
yeah.
exposing it to my, my whatever respiratory illnesses I could be carrying. And, I sniffed one and I said, okay, I'm going to buy this. And girl, you just got to stop doing that. It is not pandemic.
But I feel like that's the first time I heard of this. So I feel like you'd be somewhat safe in the sense that no one else would have probably have done that because I don't
Right.
think anyone knows to do that. You hear about the watermelons and like, you know,
Well,
hitting
you
it a little
knock,
bit or knocking it.
yeah, knock them and make sure they sound hollow.
Yeah, yeah. But I've
And
never
it,
heard about that about cantaloupe.
sniff. And avocados, actually, I heard this on NPR. Avocados, you go to the stem end and it has a little, um, almost like a little scab on the end of it.
Mhm.
And you flick that off. And if it's black, it's gone too far. And if it's green, it's just right. And if it's yellow, it's too early. But, growing up ranching, I think, and growing up in Rio Grande City, just to get back to that, gave me a real appreciation for life and for how hard it is for people. And in 1966 and 67, we had the farm worker strikes. So these migrant farm workers who were hardly being paid anything actually formed a union. It had started in California with Cesar Chavez and the uh, grapevine workers. And he sent a man named Eugene Nelson over to Texas to organize the Texas farm workers. And Eugene Nelson went to Central Texas, and he wasn't having much luck in organizing a union. And everybody said to him, "You need to go to Stark County. You need to go to Rio Grande City. That is where you're going to be able to organize." So Eugene Nelson comes into town, and they form the farm workers union, and they strike. And so we did not have a television at this time, and there were no television stations anywhere near Rio Grande City. The nearest one was about 60 miles away. So if something happened in town, you just drove over to see it. There was a big fire, you drove over to see the fire. There was a strikers protesting, you drove over to see the strikers protesting. And so you saw the news live as it was happening. And I remember my mother coming out in the yard one day and saying, kids, get in the car, get in the car. Eugene Nelson is holding up the train. So the train would take the fruit out of town.
Mm.
And it turned out that the train driver belonged to a union that recognized the farm workers union. And so Eugene Nelson actually went up and put his foot on the rail in front of the train. and the train driver refused to cross it because he recognized the Union. And so we went, and there it was. And I don't think I realized at the time. I must have been about 12. I didn't realize what I was seeing. I was seeing people who suffered
Yeah.
and wanted a better life and were fighting for it. And the Texas Rangers were called in, and the Texas Rangers were not a good group. And they actually went and beat up some of the strikers. I mean, every
Oh no.
day, our little local newspaper only came out once a week, but would have special editions, and there'd be pictures of someone who'd been beat up and had head injuries. And the strikers actually filed suit uh, against, well, part of it against the state of Texas, because the Texas had something called the a law that said that if you were um, protesting something and you're carrying your signs, that you had to stay so many feet away from the establishment. And so the strikers would go in and they would come closer to where the packing sheds were that packed the fruit. And then the Rangers would push them back. And so the case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the strikers won. The Texas picket laws were overthrown. And and the judge said that the strikers' personal rights had been violated by the Rangers
Wow.
in how they were treated. And the suit came up, I think, when I was in college, and people were talking about it. But these were middle class kids who had grown up in Austin, Texas, and never knew what a migrant farm worker community was. And they were
Hmm.
talking about it. And I was just like, I was there. I saw it while it was happening. I don't have to read about this in the newspaper. We were there. So that was I thought I was growing up in a boring little town, but actually I really appreciate that I grew up there because I learned so much about life and people. And a friend of mine paid a great compliment to me recently, and she said, I've noticed that you can talk to anybody, and it's obvious, you respect them. And I said, that's something that I learned, because I grew up in this impoverished area where people went on and did wonderful things.
Hmm.
Actually, the youngest federal judge appointee, at least when he was appointed, came from River City. And so it shows you don't don't judge people by how much money they make. You judge them by who they are. And my parents taught us that lesson also.
That's I think, a very valuable lesson to learn in life. And so it seems like you had a lot of good moments. Were there any bad moments? Not necessarily in hardships, because it seems like there was a lot of hardships too, financially,
Well,
economically around the region too. But regarding the childhood and adolescence, were there
so
any
when
rough moments?
I would say up until 11, I was not a happy child. I read all the time. I wasn't very coordinated. So if I went out, if I went out to play baseball with the little gang of kids around the neighborhood, if I was chosen on a team, members of the other team would go home. And she's on my team. And my brother was always the diplomatic negotiator, and he'd say, "Okay, okay, keep her on your team, but you can take your best hitter and have him pinch hit for her when she's up for her last strike." And I was like, I don't want to do that. I want to get up there and bat. So I was pretty much, I wouldn't say banished, but let's say I wasn't the most popular kid in the playground. And so I took to staying inside and reading books. Well, I was passed from the first to the second grade after a couple of months because because I knew how to read, and I was the youngest child. I knew how to add and various different things. And so they put me in the second grade, and it was as though I became a pariah. None of the second graders wanted to hang out with me because
Oh,
um, I was strange. I came from I was younger. I came from the first grade, and none of the first graders wanted to hang out with me anymore because I had left them and gone to the second grade. So, and then I was just treated as a weirdo. And so I feel for kids who are ostracized in school.
Mm.
So I was ostracized until I completed my middle school and moved to the high school and said, now I'm a new person. And people don't know me. I can be who I am, and I made lots of friends in the high school, but I did not have any friends up to the eighth grade. And it was a lonely life. I would go home for lunch. There was no cafeteria. So you either took a lunch or you went home for lunch. You know, we lived like probably a 5 minute drive away. It's a small town. And I would wait until the very last minute to go back to school because I just didn't want to hang out by myself at lunchtime. And one time, my mother set up a carpool with the family behind us, and their son was in school, and he'd come home to eat lunch also. And he wanted to go back and play baseball or football or
Mm.
whatever, catch or whatever they were playing on the field. And my mother would tell me, Irma's calling and says that, Antonio wants to go back to school. And I'm like, I don't want to go back early. Why are you doing this carpool thing to me? And uh, that's a part of my life I did not enjoy. And I would say, I think that many schools have improved in how they teach children at different paces, um, and allow them to learn if they're good in a certain subject, they can learn in that subject. Um, but it was tough.
I don't think it's
And
getting easier. I feel like kids are still a tough crowd.
yes, and with social media, oh my gosh, I would have been really harassed on social media.
Yeah. I'm curious, is the elementary school, middle school, and high school all in the same town? Or is the high school somewhere off where you had to like drive to?
Well, it was in the same town. In fact, the high
Okay.
school was walking distance from my house, so I was a
Okay.
walker. At the time, though, there were only two high schools in the whole county, and one in a little town called Roma and one in Rio Grande City. And so all the kids from the surrounding farming villages were bused into the high school.
Mm.
So our high school had the kids from Garciasville and La Grulla and various other little communities, and uh, was relatively big because it was the whole county, not just.
Yeah.
So I think class two was a smaller school and class three was a bigger school. So we were a class three school. And, football was very big in Texas, high school
Hmm.
football. And every year we'd have a practice game, we'd call them a scrimmage game, on the Friday night against Hebronville, which was in a different county. And Hebronville was a 2A school, and we'd beat them and we'd have an after school dance. And 6 or 7 couples would elope, or there might be a fight. Somebody got knifed one night at the dance.
Wow.
And so they would cancel the school dances for the rest of the season. And then when we went on to play all the 3A schools, we lost every game. It was just kind of funny. Okay, there's our one dance night, and now everything's done. It within the culture at that time, women were very protected and their reputations were protected.
Hmm.
So if you wanted to get married, you just went off and spent the night with your boyfriend. And when you came home, your parents had the magistrate or the priest or whomever there, and you spent the night on Friday with your boyfriend, and Sunday morning you were married, and Monday you're back in school. I was always amazed that some of the girls had engagement rings. And I'm like, that was a pretty short engagement.
It's a very different time to now.
Yes, very different. And so there were lots of young marriages and a few young mothers. They stayed in school though. And I know in Houston, they actually had a separate school for unwed mothers, which only recently closed. And it taught, oh, yeah. I mean, there was no future for these girls. It taught them how to sew and how to cook and not much else. And they finally said, it's time to close this down. This is not, um, and this is not helping them. They're not
Yeah.
able to. get jobs, et cetera. So yeah, times have changed. Rio
Yeah.
Grande City, though, is still a very unusual little place.
How big is the population? Like how big is the city?
Well, it was about 5,000 when I was growing up, and it's
Wow.
12,000 now. So it's
Okay.
still kind of small.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's a tiny small town.
yeah, we had one family restaurant to go to, and then a few other restaurants uh, that they weren't a place to eat dinner as, say, a family on a Sunday after they go to church would go to Caro's to eat. We would save up our pennies and nickels, and at that time, a hamburger was 20 cents. And we'd go to the cafe next door. A hamburger was 20 cents, Coke was a nickel, and French fries were a nickel. But if you got all three of those, that was 30 cents. And now
Oh,
you had to pay a penny tax. So you had to have 31 cents. And so I might even have 30 cents, but I didn't have 31 cents. So I had to make a decision. Coke, fries, Coke, fries, Coke,
oh, they
fries.
wouldn't let you get off with it? They wouldn't give you the
Oh, and we didn't know anything about tipping. We were terrible. We were just ragamuffins from the neighborhood, who would, in fact, to make money, and we would go out into the alleys and pick buffalo grass seed, which is very light. It's like kind of like looks like wheat,
Hmm.
and pick sackfuls of it, and then sell it at a quarter a pound to the ranchers who wanted to plow their fields and sow them with buffalo grass seed. So we'd go out, pick this buffalo, and it takes a lot to get to a pound.
Yeah.
Get to a pound.
Is tipping culture back then as prevalent as it is today?
No, in fact, I worked as a waitress in Rio Grande City, and people didn't tip me. And I worked well, by the time I was in college and worked as a waitress, there were two Sunday level restaurants, and I worked at one of them. And it was actually the cook from the other Sunday level restaurant opened up his own restaurant, and I worked there, and I did get a free meal, uh,
That's
which
nice.
was the yes, but I did not get um, any tips, and I got 75 cents an hour.
Wow. I'm
Yeah,
wondering with the interest rate what that would be in today's money.
probably not much.
Yeah, I don't think it would keep up with $15 an hour minimum wage.
No, no, no.
Yeah.
In fact, I think, yeah, when I went to college after that, minimum wage was something like $1.15.
Wow.
So I was making below, and so $1.15 is equivalent to $15 now.